I'm Jonathan Larsen with TYT Investigates, and I tend not to like it when media talk about other media, about journalists, about journalism, sort of making a special case for journalism, where that's the one thing they're allowed to give subjective opinions about is, it's okay to starve poor people by not providing benefits, but how dare you interrupt a pundit on TV? That crosses the line. So, with that said, I'm making an exception today because we found out from prosecutors in Saudi Arabia that 5 people have been sentenced to die for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. That he was the Washington Post columnist killed last year at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And there are a number of farcical elements to this that I wanted to share. The New York Times turned out a really good write-up very quickly this morning, written by Ben Hubbard, filing from Beirut, Lebanon, not Riyadh, I should note. So just to recap the kingdom's narrative here, they claim that the killing was not premeditated. They found no evidence of a plan. If you want to get really darkly ironic here, these men are most likely going to be beheaded. And the irony in that, of course, is that the actual people at the head of this plan are getting away with it. So let's examine the kingdom's narrative about what happened here. They said that the killing was not premeditated, but quoting the Times here, was a last-minute decision by Saudi agents on the ground. The story is that the agents, this is according to a spokesman for the kingdom, for the kingdom's public prosecutor, told reporters in Riyadh today, this morning, quoting from the Times now, agents had been sent to Istanbul to negotiate with Mr. Khashoggi and decided to kill him after that effort failed. So you know how you send diplomats to have negotiations with someone, and then these diplomats who've spent their entire lives diplomating, and that's the thing that they're good at, you know how when negotiations go badly, they then decide to kill the person they're talking to? And oh well, it just turns out that we made a bad call. All 5 of us happened to make a bad call, and we forgot to try to resuscitate him after we made that bad call, and just comedy of errors, then he fell on the bone saw. And also, his body's never been recovered. The way it happens when 5 diplomats who diplomat for a living decide to kill someone. So a few more details here. I'm just going to read 3 paragraphs here from Hubbard's piece where he talks about, instead of saying what he talks about, I'll just say what he says. Investigations by the Turkish authorities and a United Nations official found vast evidence of premeditation, such as the arrival of 15 Saudi agents in Istanbul in the hours before Mr. Khashoggi's killing. They included a body double. Because who better to negotiate with someone than someone who looks kind of like the person you want to negotiate with, right? I think that's fairly standard for a diplomatic team to bring, hey, that guy looks a little like the Iranian foreign minister. Let's bring him. He'll like him. Happens all the time. They included a body double who sought to leave a false trail of surveillance footage indicating that Mr. Khashoggi was still alive, and a forensic doctor who the Turks say arrived with a bone saw. Hope nothing happens with that in the negotiation. That was used to dismember Mr. Khashoggi's body. Recordings captured by Turkish intelligence inside the consulate before, during, and after the killing, and shared with the United Nations investigator, revealed the agents discussing how to fit Mr. Khashoggi's body into suitcases. When Mr. Khashoggi reached the consulate, one of the agents referred to him as the, quote, sacrificial animal. After his death, no effort was made to resuscitate him. An assessment by the Central Intelligence Agency found that the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, found that he had probably ordered the operation, which included 2 private jets, which, diplomats can certainly rustle up on their own when they're planning to diplomat someone to death. 2 diplomatic facilities, and the team of agents. An investigation by the United Nations Human Rights Agency concluded that there was, quote, credible evidence warranting further investigation of high-level Saudi officials' individual liability, including the Crown Prince's. The Saudi prosecutor's office today said that they had talked to or looked at 31 suspects and arrested 21 of them. 21 people in a non-premeditated thing that just happened, that all of them spontaneously, without malice aforethought, decided to participate in. 11 were put on trial. 5 of them were sentenced to death. They can appeal. Best of luck to you with that. And 3 others were given a total of 24 years in prison for covering up the crime and violating other laws. I want to share a little bit about the trial here. You may have noticed I did not name the 5 men. I'm not trying to be deferential to their families. I'm not trying to avoid assassin shaming them. The reason I'm not naming them is because I don't know their names. Now, why didn't the New York Times print their names? Because no one knows their names. Let that sink in. No one knows who the 5 people are who have been on trial in Riyadh for almost a year in pretty much the most high-profile case you could imagine. The court proceedings themselves were secret. You had to be a special somebody to attend. Foreign diplomats, including Americans, were allowed to attend on the condition that they were sworn to secrecy. Not just the names of the people who are going to have their heads removed were secret, the entire proceedings. Everything that, I highly doubt that they got to put on a robust defense, but anything that might have come out in the trial, nothing. Including, by the way, the evidence that it was being covered up simply by the fact that the trial was insufficient, right? If the trial is not robust, if it's not vigorously adversarial, then you know that's a cover-up, right? You don't need information to come out of the trial, but at a minimum, you need to see how the trial is conducted. So, the reason I'm talking about this, making my exception regarding not wanting to talk about, oh, journalists so noble, let's all protect journalists, is not that I don't agree with that sentiment. I do, but I try not to indulge it. The reason I am indulging it today, yes, it's an important case, and it has implications reaching far beyond Mr. Khashoggi's individual fate and the people close to him and the impact on them. Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States. Just last month, maybe even this month, the US Congress decided to block an effort that had bipartisan support that would have cut off assistance to the Saudi, not all US assistance, but some US assistance to the Saudi war effort in Yemen, which is now, what is it, in its 3rd year now, I think, which has caused a massive humanitarian crisis, literally the largest ongoing humanitarian crisis in the world, with well over 1 million people, I think it's multiple millions, living in a state of crisis, either literally going hungry, dying from disease, and it's man-made. It's an entirely man-made crisis caused by Saudis bottling up supplies in and out of the country. Obviously, I mean. And we are helping them do that. And it's just wild to think that, try to imagine Iran doing anything remotely like this and not just being the subject, the target of massive vitriol and hatred across the country. Here we are blithely assisting Saudi Arabia in parallel with this in the open cover-up. A few other notes about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is currently trying to get nuclear power. To do so, they need the U.S. to sign off. There's a treaty, I forget what it's called, 123 resolution, something like that, that basically requires countries that want to gain permission, technology, assistance to have civilian nuclear power they need to get permission from the U.S., essentially, from the signatories to this resolution, if I have that terminology correct. And the Trump administration wants to help them do it. They're working together. And here at TYT Investigates, we have broken stories about the money that's flowing in this effort, who it's going to, Trump lawyers, things like that. Some of the things we've also revealed are we're training Saudi prison officials. We're training Saudi pilots. We're supporting the Saudi Air Force. These are all stories that TYT Investigates broke, let alone all the other stories that everyone else has broken about just how intertwined we are, just how culpable we are for supporting a regime which not only beheads people, but has an entirely authoritarian regime that throws anyone remotely close to a human rights activist in prison down a hole, never to be seen again. We're helping them with their prisons. We are, all of us. And so that's why I wanted to talk about Jamal Khashoggi, because he's only one victim of a regime that we are actively supporting. I rambled on a little bit longer than I thought I was going to, but I want to see, as always, what you folks have to say, which is why we do this live every weekday at 11:30-ish Eastern Time, every weekday, not tomorrow on Christmas. And so I hope you'll subscribe if you don't already. If you're not familiar with TYT Investigates, we do original reporting, which you can find at tyt.com/investigates. And I show up live every weekday so that I can have a conversation with you in the chat, which is why I keep looking down, because I've got the chat up here. So now I'm going to share a little bit about what you all have to say, and I'm going to stop saying what I'm going to do, and I'm going to actually do it. Reptile Z says, good morning, peeps. DLJ says, good morning, all. Good morning, everyone. Kenta Krostovsky says, oops, he dismembered himself. Accidents happen, Kenta. Shariatis and Per say, good morning and good evening. We get a good evening from Sweden from Per, my uncle's name. Per noticed before the Swedish ornaments in my tree back there. Sherry Addis says, Saudi Arabia should not be an ally. So, I'm one of those people, maybe this makes me a collaborator, but I'm one of those people who isn't always so sure that you can't, maybe we can affect better change in and of by Saudi Arabia by being an ally, but by insisting on change. Right now, there doesn't seem to be any incentive for them to change. We're handing them massive arm deals because they're paying us money. We're supporting them in just about every way you can imagine, financially, militarily, diplomatically. They've paid no price whatsoever for failing to cooperate with the investigation, which the Turks said. Turkey has accused Saudi Arabia of not cooperating in the investigation. And if the person doing the investigation accuses you of not cooperating, you're probably guilty. It's very rare that someone is entirely cooperative with an investigation and the person conducting that investigation says, no, you're not, when they're actually cooperating, I mean, of course. Hurricane Ravi says, hey, everyone, I hope you're all well. I echo and amplify that wish, Ravi, thank you. D. Scully reminds people to hit the like button if you choose. This is a free society. If you so choose, you're welcome and appreciated in the event that you hit the like button. And if you hit the don't like button, I still welcome and appreciate you. Sherry Addis says, why do we cozy up to the worst regimes? Is it all Trump or is Congress complicit? Is there a reason we love dictators? Well, it's certainly not all Trump. He inherited this relationship. He did not initiate it. It has been a bipartisan relationship. Democrats and Republican presidents alike have maintained it, and Congress is absolutely complicit. As I mentioned earlier, the new Pentagon budget bill that went through, progressives in the House, with Republican support, got various measures in there that I actually talked about several weeks ago before the bill passed. doing all kinds of things, some of which were related to Saudi Arabia, saying, no, we're not going to supply them spare parts, which they need a lot of to keep their Air Force in the air. So plane comes back, it needs a new widget, and there we are. Here's your made in the USA widget, made in Connecticut, Raytheon, wherever it's made. Here you go, widget yourself and go on your next bombing or surveillance run over Yemen. So that was one of the provisions, and it wasn't in the Senate bill, but the Senate also supported measures to disengage the U.S. from the Saudi efforts in Yemen. And I didn't read a lot of detailed stuff from the Hill about this, but apparently when the conference happened, right, the congressional leaders from both houses meet to figure out what's a compromise version of this bill that both of our chambers can vote on. The White House apparently said, get all that stuff out of there that we don't like. So is Congress complicit? Yes. Mobius says Britain has been hands off the Khashoggi because Prince Andrew was being blackmailed by Mossad. I thought you were going somewhere a little bit more well established with that, so shame on me for reading that out loud, but I have not heard that. If you have a link to that, please share. I would be interested in seeing that. Rob P says, yes, give the 9/11 country of origin nukes. And just to be clear, the nuclear deal that the U.S. is talking about with Saudi Arabia is for civilian nuclear power, not for actual military nuclear missiles or bombs. And one of the provisions in Resolution 123 or whatever it is, specifically says, you agree, no production or enrichment of uranium, plutonium, all the fun stuff that goes into nuclear bombs. It is, of course, however, one step closer to the capacity, right? All of a sudden, you've now got the infrastructure that you would need. DLJ says, death by diplomat presumably involves negotiating the quantity and quality of virgins available in the afterlife. So here's a brief side trip about me and making fun of religions. I believe that all magical explanations for how things work and why they are sort of equally absurd. And so I actually try not to ridicule an individual ones. I tend to make an exception for Christianity only because it's the majority, and those myths are the least examined. And so, but I try not to go after the absurdities that are part and parcel of other religions, simply because I feel like we already have 70% of the country that considers those things risible on the face of it. And I don't often use risible in conversation, so I apologize. My point being that I would like to see, I see them all as cults, and not necessarily because of the bad connotation that cult has, just because of the neutral connotations that cult has. And so I don't sort of like the special pleading for Christianity. Well, of course it's not ridiculous that a god, the God made a human baby inside a nice lady, and he then was born and walked around on water and turned things into food and died and then came back and then he left again. I don't even remember exactly how all that stuff goes. And he raised people from the dead. You know, that to me, no more or less entitled to legitimacy than getting virgins in the afterlife. But I appreciate the sentiment. Dan A says, nobody builds the most expensive form of new energy unless it is to make nuclear weapons. I'm sure they decided that wind farms are just really ugly. Dan. Rob P says, does Bernie support the Saudis? Has he spoken out against them? I don't know that specifically, but I have to imagine that he is not super happy about U.S. involvement in Yemen. In fact, I'm almost positive about that because the whole sort of squad cohort has been pretty outspoken on Yemen. And there's not a lot of other reasons, I think. There are lots of other reasons to have a problem with the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. So I certainly wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. D. Scully says, as we shift from a democracy to an oligarchy, I sort of resent your assumption. That's just stipulated. As we go about our slide from democracy, which is in transition to fascism, D. Scully continues, it's important to keep in mind that our allies will not be democracies, but authoritarian regimes. So, it's not a new thing by any stretch of the imagination for the U.S. to have undemocratic allies and to be an enemy of democracy in other countries. I was just reading, but not enough, about just how horrifically Jefferson, if you want to go back that far, Jefferson screwed over Haiti and the liberated slaves, the free slaves who were setting up democracy there, and how just abysmally and brutally the U.S. responded to that. So there's nothing magical about democracy that ensures that our allies are only Democrats. You can ask the Shah of Iran how his family came into power. Rob P. says Epstein is in the middle of every conspiracy these days. Epstein stole my keys. I like that. Dan A. says, why was there almost no coverage of the Saudi Arabia terrorist who was training on a U.S. military base and attacked the USA on that base? Seems like that would be a major terrorist story. Well, I think what happened there, this is the Pensacola shooting, and I came this close to looking up details on it, but I didn't know how closely I wanted to tie that into this, because I definitely do not want to suggest that people from Saudi Arabia are bad people. That is not what we are talking about, and that is not true. So I just simply wasn't sufficiently schooled on what reason, if any, there was to think that this was not just someone who was carrying out a mass shooting and who happened to be Saudi Arabian, or whether the fact of their official connection to Saudi Arabia was somehow connected to all of this. I think carrying out a mass shooting on a U.S. military base, not exactly what the Saudi Arabian government would like its people to be doing. So I didn't include that. But what I was going to say was, I think the shooting kind of fell into the mass shooting bucket rather than the terrorism bucket. And one thing I think is kind of a weird phenomenon is that shootings tend to not get covered qua terrorism. They tend to get covered as shootings. And even when, like, if you remember, not too long after 9/11, and some of you young folks won't remember this at all, but there was a sniper in the Washington, D.C. area. This went on for weeks, if I remember correctly. Just from out of the blue, shot would come, someone was down on the ground dead, and then there would be nothing for days. And there was discussion of it in the context of terrorism, because it was kind of in that awful 9/11 afterglow, whatever the opposite of an afterglow is, where you had the anthrax attacks, you had the attempted shoe bomber, and you had the Washington sniper. But it kind of mostly got covered as a shooting thing for whatever reason. Hurricane Ravi says, what a wonderful world we live in. And then there's like a terrible smiley face, horrifying smiley face. So here's one thing I do want to point out, which is my job is to focus on things that are bad. And every citizen's job is to focus on things that are bad, all with an eye towards making them better. But part of the problem is, if everything in my line of sight is bad because that's where I'm looking, then everything is bad. And you tend not to be able to gauge how big is the piece of the pie that you're not looking at, which is the good stuff, right? And if all you see is bad, you don't know how big the good pie is, it's very easy and understandable to fall into this idea that everything is bad, that things are terrible, and they're probably worse than they've ever been. Even where we are today, even with the awful things that are happening, humanity generally, and the United States specifically, have been in much worse positions in the past. And there is still a lot of good that is happening in our reality with people we care about, to people we care about, at the hands of people we care about. You know, there's still joy in the world. There's still happiness, and it's okay. We want to honor the need to do something about the bad things, and we want to honor the people who are suffering because of those bad things. And it can feel like dishonoring those people and that those obligations when we allow ourselves to be happy, to be literally carefree, free of care about those people. But we're entitled to those moments. We're allowed those moments, and it's important that we have those moments. This is something I've talked about before with you guys, but like, if we would urge it to our friends, right? If our friends were despairing, we would tell them, you know, look around. There are people having good, positive lives and enjoying the weather if they like skiing or whatever it is. There are people finding beauty. There are people creating beauty. If we can extend that to our friends, we should absolutely do that to ourselves as well. So it actually is a wonderful world. It's terrible based on the chunk that we look at. Comparing that chunk to where we know we could be is especially painful, right? It's one thing if this is the only reality you've ever known, if you can't conceive of anything better. We know what better looks like. We've had better. But it's still a wonderful world, I think. Mobius is talking about, you guys are talking about Epstein now. I'm skipping the Epstein stuff, guys. Joseph Murphy says Saudi Arabia is protecting the United States hegemony by enforcing the petrodollar. D. Scully says the values and goals of authoritarian regimes are not aligned with the needs and goals of democracies. Authoritarian governments and democracies are actually equal opposites, according to Poli Sci. I agree. I agree. But that doesn't mean that the people running democracies don't sometimes prefer authoritarian regimes. They might be conceptually opposite, but in terms of power dynamics and real politics, sometimes the leaders of democracy don't hew to the values that made them leaders. Theron Mayo says, haha, widget yourself. Okay. I just gotta, you guys just bumped the chat. Wow, you guys are much more chatty. I think it hadn't caught up to you. Much more chatty than I thought. D. Scully says the policies that build and stabilize democracies destroy and destabilize authoritarian governments and vice versa. One should expect us to be distancing ourselves from old allies and making new ones. Literally making new ones, right? If there's one cause that most justifies U.S. intervention overseas in other countries, it ought to be the fostering of democracy. Sherry Addis says, a country so rich in oil wants nuclear energy? Yeah, right. Well, actually, they have had this plan for a while now to transition the economy off of oil because there's literally only so much of it. And they are trying, they've got this very ambitious plan to try to shift their economy. So the idea that they also want nuclear energy is not super far-fetched. And the other argument is that it's quite possible that if they really wanted nukes, they could probably get them or pay someone else to launch them, whether it's Pakistan or North Korea. Let's see. Pear says, are there no conditions where U.S. is selling weapons, human rights, democracy, etc.? I think there probably are, but all these sales need to be signed off on by the Pentagon. And to be honest, I'm not up on how rigorously those standards are enforced or what the standards are. William Martyr says, yeah, what a joke. I'm sure the Saudi Arabians have absolutely no interest in having a nuclear missile. Really no interest at all. Yes, I'm being sarcastic. You. Daniel S. says religions are meta-narratives. That sentence is a meta-narrative. Oh, wait, maybe it's not. Rob P. says not only the infrastructure, the nuclear infrastructure, the knowledge that they can sell. I assume we're talking about nuclear technology still. Hurricane Ravi says, I believe there was a creator who created the universe, but it was people who created religion. And again, no offense to you in particular, but that's essentially deism. That's what the founding fathers of the United States believed in, that there was essentially a magical explanation for how reality came to exist. And after that, everything was either on autopilot or there was no pilot, however you want to put it, but there was no interventionist God. And I find that, I apologize, but I'm just clarifying my own atheology, which says that notion is just as logically absurd as the idea of an interventionist one who would do whatever things he or she is posited to do in one's respective religion. Hurricane Ravi says, I believe in all religions, but also I believe in none of them. Okay, now you're messing with me. DLJ says, FYI, I live in an Islamic country, so I am also poking fun at the majority. Well, it was nice to know you, DLJ. Actually, I don't remember which Islamic country you live in, so I shouldn't assume that there's theocracy at work there. But I will say good for you, and I take back my little lecture scolding from earlier. I hope you didn't take it in that spirit. I was again, talking about myself. William Martyr says, never underestimate the power of the cosmic resonance. I will do my best not to do that. Daniel S. says, Saudi Arabia just sentenced 5 to death for Khashoggi. What a show trial, how dismal. It wasn't even a show trial. You couldn't see it. They didn't show it to anyone. I mean, they did, but only a handful of people who were sworn to secrecy. So it was neither show nor tell. It was just for them to say, yeah, we found him, killed him, nothing to see here, move along. Hurricane Ravi says, each religion has a part of the whole truth, so you can learn from all of them. Sure, that's true, you can, but, and I tell people all the time, not that I'm asked all the time, but I say, of course there are good things about religion. People wouldn't subscribe to them if there weren't. The problem is with the other stuff. And most of the scriptures for various religions will tell you you're not allowed to take just some of this. You're not allowed to cafeteria your way through this. It's all or nothing. And I agree with that. Eduardo says, him and Ro Khanna introduced bills to condemn the war in Yemen, et cetera, right, referring back to Bernie Sanders. Yeah, and there were others, including some Republicans, who co-sponsored those bills. Ali J says, Saddam Hussein was our ally until Bush decided he wasn't. This is true. D. Scully says, Jonathan, we are not a democracy anymore. That's an important thing for people to grasp because there takes real effort to reinstall a democracy in a country that is at our stage of transition. Yeah, I think that's an important point to make. And I certainly wouldn't, I'm not a poli-sci person, so I wouldn't quibble over the technical definitions of democracy versus not democracy. But I'm not sure, just from a tactical point of view, I'm not sure that you are better off trying to win people over by starting with trying to win them over to the idea that we're not a democracy anymore. I don't know. D. Scully says, the Princeton study was a long time ago. Don't take my word for it. Take theirs. Our democracy has been destroyed. I think maybe you're talking about that study that showed that like the oligarchy essentially gets what it wants. They aligned like votes in Congress or something like that. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong study. With essentially, I think, how much money you have. And the study basically found that Congress doesn't care what voters want at all. Sherry Addis says, D. Scully, then we must begin reviving our democracy in 2020, which is only, a couple weeks away, so let's get ready. D. Scully says, in comparative governments, in political science, students learn how to assess the needs of countries in terms of allies, in addition to determining the stability of governments and requirements therein. Punks for Progress, hello Punks for Progress, says America was never a democracy. It was a democratic republic from the start, which is not a true democracy. From the outset of the Industrial Revolution, the capitalists have been in charge. And I always want to correct when people say that anarchy means just running around, everyone running around wildly with their hair on fire, no rules, all that stuff. But I'm also always too lazy to look up what anarchy actually means. But as a comic nerd, I know that Alan Moore, the writer of Watchmen and V for Vendetta, he was very pro-anarchy. So I probably should do myself the service of looking more into detail on it. Dan A., following up on the Pensacola shooting discussion we had earlier, says, NPR said the shooter on the military base was radicalized after entering the program the first day. Then there was nothing more said. So I'm not sure which program you mean, Dan. The training program at the base? D. Scully says, it would be nice if it was possible to simply vote democracy back in, but that's not a possibility. At this stage, it will literally take a revolution. Donald Quixote says, I missed part of the stream. What happened in the Khashoggi case? I'm assuming you're caught up now, but if not, you have, what you missed was the Saudi prosecutor announced today that 5 people have been sentenced to die for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist murdered at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. He was very critical of Saudi Arabia, very publicly critical, and the Saudis claim that they sent a team of people to negotiate with him, and when the negotiation failed, they said, oh, you know what, we should kill him instead. Let's do that. That's probably even easier than negotiating, despite the fact that we're trained diplomats, but somehow know how to kill people. We've been talking about that, about the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, our complicity in it, the fact that people want not to be connected to Saudi Arabia, but wherever we fall on the spectrum of representational democracy, it ain't far enough to actually affect change on the relationship with Saudi Arabia. D. Scully says successfully reinstalling democracy in America is highly unlikely because civics was removed from schools decades ago and Americans lack the requisite knowledge or understanding. It really is amazing. It's amazing. And it doesn't mean that people are dumb. They've just never been taught how stuff works. Like, how do things happen? I've referred before to this article I read about, I think it was Keith Ellison's campaign in, I forget what city it was, but he was running for office, and they talked about their door knocking strategy. And what they did was they didn't walk in and say, vote for Keith Ellison, he's great. They said, you know that Social Security check you get? Here's why you get it. And here's who doesn't want you to get it. And here's what they're going to do about it if you don't vote for Keith Ellison. When you give that mini civics lesson and you bring that home, and the end of your lesson is you, and you see your part in that whole little civics mini lesson, that's pretty effective. Keith Ellison won that campaign. Hadija Ibrahim says, yeah, it was terrifying because everyone was so terrified that it was going to happen anywhere else and everywhere else. Also, the reason that the media has covered these terrorists that have done mass shooting as shooters because they weren't Muslim or Arab, and that's wrong, but it's the way things have been since before 9/11. Hurricane Ravi says, don't mind me, it was my attempt at a joke. I should really stop trying to be funny. It's hard, especially when I'm being overly literal, which is a classic flaw of mine, so I apologize. You're doing great. Sherry Addis says, D. Scully, we cannot give in to despair. A journey of 1,000 miles, ... begins with a single step. I assume is where you were going with that, ironically. Okay, Dan finishes his thought about the Pensacola shooter. Says, yes, Morning Edition on NPR, talking about the military training program. My point is, if our military is training people who turn out to be terrorists, that is bad. Osama bin Laden was trained by Reagan. Not personally, people, but if you don't know by now, you certainly should, that the U.S. was funding and supporting the Mujahideen, out of whose ranks Osama bin Laden eventually, created Al Qaeda. I think it was him. I don't recall now offhand. Ali J says, generally anarchy means a society without hierarchies. Thank you for that. I knew I liked it. No Middle Ground says, can't stay awake, but getting used to it. That sounds nice to me. Let's see. Reptile Z says, I don't think they will let me bring a bone saw into my union negotiations, but I would try. Yeah, and remember to bring, how many people were arrested? 21. So bring 20 people with you on your private jet for your negotiations. And don't forget the body double. D. Scully says, at the end of the day, there are literally only two types of government, democracy versus authoritarian. America created the first democracy, and Americans don't know it. Dan A. says, I'm concerned we have an ongoing habit of training terrorists. Well, in fairness, Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't technically speaking a terrorist. So it's not just terrorists. Let's see. Oh, is that what happened? Oh, okay. So Sherry is saying, Pear, so generous. Wow, amazing. So I saw a number amount come up, which I thought meant, so if I'm bad at the whole YouTube thing, but every once in a while, one of you folks throws us some money and I go off on a tangent about how grateful I am to the people who choose to do that, and also to the people who support us with their time and their attention and with their social media sharing. All those things are real. This came up a little differently because it said SEK, so I was confused about what that was, so I didn't say anything about it. And then Sherry, when I saw your comment about so generous, I realized, oh, that's probably the abbreviation for Swedish kroner, which is, of course, the unit of currency in Sweden. And so I finally put it together. So Per, thank you so much. My Uncle Per is no longer with us, which is the way, for some reason, people say he died. My Uncle Per died many years ago. I shouldn't say it's okay, because it was not okay, and I'm still opposed to it, but I am okay, is what I mean. Although when I found out, I was at work and I started crying at work. But anyway, so it is nice 2 days before Christmas to get a present from Per. It's been a long time, so thank you very much, Per. And it was a generous amount. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Okay. D. Scully says, Jonathan, you literally explained how to bridge the gap. It is through education. We're talking about civics, right? The fact that civics is no longer in schools. And so therefore people don't know, what levers do I press to get things done? How do things get done? D. Scully continues, it's the reason that leftists are constantly educating people in their movements. That is how you reach them. I agree. D. Scully says we have to work harder on explaining civics to people. William Martyr, I am seeing your comments. I'm just not following them coherently. So I'm not trying to blank you out. I'm just not following what you're saying. D. Scully says, Jonathan, did anyone ever tell you before that left policies build democracy and right policies destroy democracies and build authoritarian governments instead? That's fundamentals to poli-sci. I haven't seen it framed that way, but I mean, I think there are, I mean, I guess there have been leftists, right, who have been authoritarian. I think that's fairly uncontroversial, but maybe the argument is that they didn't follow actual leftist policies. I don't know. D. Scully is giving me some serious education in poli-sci here now. Says the founder of modern political science is actually Machiavelli. Everything he discovered about authoritarian governments is classified as rightist. Sherry Addis says, when I was in school 100 years ago, civics lied to us. If you guys don't follow Mike Harriot, the writer for The Root, who went viral with his piece calling Buttigieg a lying MFer, you should go follow him on Twitter. Every once in a while, he does these amazing history lessons in these tweet threads that is just sort of like the forgotten or hidden history behind a specific thing. And they're so enlightening and they're so important because they 100% address, directly confront things that we're dealing with now that we forget that virtually everything that we've had to face, someone's faced it before. It's like one of the things I hate the most in politics is we need fresh thinking. We know what works. It's not like, well, here it is, the year 2019, and we still just don't know how to run a place, right? We just have no idea. How is it that you should run a society? Got no clue. Let's spitball. Let's brainstorm a little bit, kick a few ideas around, see what comes up. We need some fresh ideas. We know what works, right? If people are hungry, give them food. Don't allow, literally don't allow economic systems in which people can extract excessive amounts of money from other people, and certainly not for doing things that have negative social value, right? Getting exorbitant fees for facilitating mergers and acquisitions, that's getting rewarded for creating a bigger company that's going to now squelch competition, centralize things, we don't need fresh ideas. Sherry Addis says, happy holidays. Happy holidays to everyone out there. I agree with that. D. Scully corrects me and says, no, there has never been any leftists that were authoritarians. People confused economics with political science. Being an authoritarian means that you are right wing. It's a definitional concept. I think that's what I was trying to flounder my way towards. So thank you. Sherry Addis has got to go for breakfast, but says, love you all. That's you folks. Lots of hearts there from Sherry. William Martyr says, remember Joe Biden was the establishment's first pick, and then goes into the Knights of Malta. William, why do you do this to me every time? And the crazy thing is I don't totally ignore you, because there's a part of me that's like, well, maybe it's worth looking into. D. Scully says, to help you understand, left and right are definitional concepts. So leftism is egalitarian, anti-authoritarian, and anti-establishmentarian. Reptile Z says, lots of chat about the person's political bar graph with no background as to how it relates to an individual's worldview. Just saying. The Parsons political bar graph. Sorry, I thought it said persons. D. Scully says, rightism is anti-egalitarian, authoritarian, and establishmentarian. Felicia Ritter says, happy holidays, Jonathan, and happy holidays to you, Felicia. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Felicia adds, I'm assuming it's a she. I apologize if I'm wrong, Felicia. Says, the establishment sucks. I hope Bernie Sanders wins. I feel like I'm ready to go, but D. Scully's in the middle of a super intense, cool college lecture, and I don't want to interrupt him. And if I sign off, the live chat goes away, or at least people are no longer able to post. So let's see what D. Scully says here. One can't be against the concentration of power and wealth in the hands of the ruling class while being for it. One doesn't fight to be free from subjugation and have the right to self-govern while fighting to be subjugated. You're kind of breaking my mind here a little bit, D. Scully. So that's cool. Thank you. All right, you guys are in it now, but I'm afraid I am gonna. You guys are totally going. You know what? I could just take the mic off and walk away, and you guys are going to have a great conversation here. Punks for Progress says, the right-left paradigm begins day one with whether you are anti or pro-capitalist. All other designations attached follow from that premise. D. Scully says, Jonathan, I think you do a great job with your live show. I think it's very educational and important. I'm not trying to be hard on you. Just wanted to bring up a few things to help. I didn't take it that way at all. Like I said, this is a conversation, and just because I'm on this side of the camera does not mean that I'm more authoritative about anything, and certainly not everything. So thank you for the kind words, D. Scully, and thanks for the poli-sci primer there. I think I get what you mean, but I also think that there's probably a little bit of a disconnect there between when the average layperson talks about left and right, they tend to mean a set of policies, typically within a capitalist structure, but not always, I guess. D. Scully says economics has nothing to do with political science. Stop bringing your economics textbook to other courses, people. Right, and so that's what I'm saying. I think that in the common parlance, right, left and right tend to mean economics. So I don't know whether you can win that battle or even how much it matters. Felicia says, aloha, Jonathan. Happy holidays to everyone. Big hearts to everyone. Right back at you. Thank you so much, Felicia. Thank you for your support as well. And Pear says, good night, everybody. Love you all. I can't even remember now how to say goodbye in Swedish. Isn't that terrible? Isn't that terrible? Oh, that makes me so sad. But if you don't know, hey is hello, H-E-J. But I can't remember how to say goodbye now. Oh, that's terrible, terrible. D. Scully says the disconnect is that people were brainwashed with economics. Silas Greystone says you should bring D. Scully on your show officially one day, Jonathan. That's a good idea. The only problem with bringing people on the show is I still haven't figured out the whole live stream, a two-way stream. D. Scully says it's because they have internalized the desires of their oppressor. The oppressor needs them to be focused on the GDP rather than government and political policies. Hey-do, of course. Pear reminds me. Hey-do. Right, thank you. That's how you say goodbye. I guess it's probably like hello not. So it's hey-do. And if my mother's watching, she'll make fun of my bad pronunciation. So I apologize. Punks for Progress closes. I'm closing this down now, guys, but Punks for Progress says the capitalist ruling class used its economic power to manipulate and control the political process. The two, economics and politics, cannot be divorced from one another. Now I feel like D. Scully and Punks for Progress maybe are going to have a problem there. Maybe not. I could be misreading it. But either way, I'm shutting it down. D. Scully says, Merry Christmas, Jonathan. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas back to you if you celebrate. And just a quick note about Merry Christmas. I say Happy Holidays because I don't know who's listening, and I want everyone to enjoy the holidays. I don't want everyone to have a Merry Christmas because not everyone celebrates it. That would be weird to say Merry Christmas to someone who doesn't celebrate Christmas. I do, however, like the fact that the war on Christmas, the other side, insisting that everyone say Merry Christmas, if that succeeds, will ultimately have the effect of neuterizing and de-Christianizing Christmas, which is already happening, right? I know Jewish people who celebrate Christmas. Christmas is not, it's not that Christmas is winning, it's becoming something other than Christmas, which is exactly what the early Christians didn't want Christmas to be. That's why it was literally illegal in some places. So it's kind of win-win as far as I'm concerned. So Merry Christmas, everyone. And with that, I'm going to be gone tomorrow. I'm going to be gone Wednesday, Christmas Day. And I will be back on Thursday. So I hope I will see you then, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And we do this every weekday, every working weekday. Thank you, unions, for our days off. And if you don't already, please subscribe to our channel. We talk not just commentary on the news, but we also occasionally do interviews. I spoke with some Black Lives Matter people from South Bend a week or so ago. And we also do commentary. Sorry, there's a really big bird out there. We live near, I guess it's like an eagle, a bunch of eagles and hawks and stuff live in the reservation there. But we also talk about our own original reporting, which I need to get back to work on. So if you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. If you don't celebrate Christmas, Happy Holidays. And if Merry and happy don't describe where you are right now, I would say reach out to other people and take care of yourself, take care of each other. And remember, sometimes when we're down, the best thing we can do to get into a different place is to help someone else. Sometimes when we feel like we need help, the best way to help ourselves is to extend a hand to someone else. So please give that a try, but certainly don't be alone if you have options to the contrary. So if you've got no one else, at least know that I'm thinking about you in the abstract and wishing well to everyone. So thank you. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. And I'll be back on Thursday. Bye.